Shannon, thank you so much for making time to talk to me this afternoon. We're both in the Northern Hemisphere. We've both got nice blue skies outside today. I'm obviously sat in my office with a strange screen behind me. I'm really impressed by the screen that you've got behind you. It looks very authentic, it looks very good indeed. But just before we start, can I just introduce you to everybody? I've got the great pleasure of talking with Shannon Guihan, who is Chief TreadRight Sustainability Officer. And what we're going to do this afternoon is, well, I'm going to be guided through the work that Shannon is doing and to understand something of where TreadRight is going with the work they're doing. I'm very excited by it. I hope you're going to enjoy this journey too, with Shannon as our guide. So Shannon, over to you.
Hi. Yeah, it's great to chat with you today, and I'm really happy to talk about the journey that we've come through. Where to begin? Shall I begin how I got into this industry?
That would be great if you would, Shannon. Yeah.
So I started as a sea kayak guide. I'm from East Coast Canada in Newfoundland, and started as a sea kayak guide, and then was once a bike guide. So this is the bike studio, bike shed that my family spends a lot of time in. That's where the office is these days. But I guided for several years, studied, of course, but the place that I grew up in, when I started paddling and cycling there, the whole province was going through a cod moratorium, a cessation of the cod fisheries, which was the #1 reason why the province was settled by the English and the Irish and some French many moons ago. And so there was a mad dash to whatever's next. And as we see so often, when heavy industry fails, service-based comes in, and tourism was just happening. It wasn't planned at the time, it was just happening. And I was part of it as a guide. And so that 100% led me down the path of studying sustainable tourism, environmental management for tourism, and is why I'm fascinated with destination development, the way tour operators behave in a region, the impact it has on a community, because I suppose I grew up in it. So I've worked with tour operators for a while, bike tour operators here in Canada, food travel companies, and then having bounced around tour operators for a wee while, I realized I didn't want to work with any longer. I'd done operations for quite a long time, and I started a small consultancy that's here in Toronto, and founded that, sort of co-built it. It's still around, and it's sold my half of the business about 2 years ago now. And the Travel Corporation was one of my first clients way back in the day. And I was brought on in 2011 to oversee what was then the Travel Corporation Conservation Foundation's messaging and project selection, project vetting, and it's now called the TreadRight Foundation. However, it's owned by the Travel Corporation, which is a group of 40+ travel brands globally, and it is the philanthropic arm of the Travel Corporation. And they were a client, as I said, for many years. And when I left my agency, thinking I needed a break from consulting, Brett Tolman and David Hosking, the gentleman that I work quite closely with, of course, Brett's the chief executive of the Travel Corporation. It was time that they were looking for a chief sustainability officer to really bring the various initiatives that addressed and touched on sustainability together in a fulsome program. So it was good timing.
So did you have something of the experience that I had when I was working with the Association of Independent Tour Operators, that when you started to look, I looked at it from the association, there were about 45 businesses, I think, in that association. It wasn't one company, it was a voluntary group who came together in a trade association. But it was interesting that when we started to look at it, we discovered they were doing a whole load of things that nobody in the trade association had understood. They each knew about their own bit in the one company, but they didn't understand how much other people were doing. And I'm guessing you had something of a similar experience across the travel company.
With 40 different brands, You've got Trafalgar, you've got Insight Vacations, you've got Uniworld, Adventure World, Kentucky. You've got a whole separate outfit in South Africa. You have a lot of people that want to implement changes and initiatives. And so, yeah, we had a huge number of very disparate initiatives addressing single-use plastic, talking to suppliers, utilizing our TreadRight Foundation capabilities and funding. And so, yeah, a big part of bringing it all under one umbrella is tracking and reporting. And tracking and reporting is a critical task, and it's a very, very, very big undertaking, certainly when you have such a big group. Part of the challenge of implementing sustainability at the Travel Corporation is building the right structure of people in the right places.
Are you finding that you can recruit internally? You find people within the organization to take those roles?
100%. We wouldn't do it otherwise. And so the TreadRight Foundation, or the TreadRight team, is 3 people: myself, my colleagues Nadine and Parissa. Parissa oversees marketing and comms via our own channels and with our brands. And Nadine works with me on all of the strategic efforts, climate action plans. And we then need the operations teams, the marketing teams, the office leads amongst our footprints, or we wouldn't get anywhere. So we have to recruit from within. And I believe in recruiting from within because I believe in building elements of sustainability into job functions. And I think that is far more successful than trying to lay on top another level of operations. That's logical to me from a business perspective. And then somebody leaves, you got to start again. If you build it into the role, that's where you'll see success.
Presumably, there's a couple of things that occur to me about that, having discussed it with people in TUI as well, which is that actually people who, I remember there was one resort rep who was notorious when people said, I haven't got time to do that. She'd just turn around and say, well, I used to do it. Can't you do your job? And that is so powerful. The fact is someone who has the same job function actually saying, come on, we can do this. It's a very powerful statement rather than someone coming in from outside and trying to motivate the change in behavior. And plus the fact, presumably, you can then build it into KPIs for individual performance so that the expectation of delivery is there. It's not a nice to have, it becomes a key job function across the company over time.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I've always, I never called myself a sustainable tourism consultant. And the reason is because you're a tourism consultant at the end of the day. And it's the same with job functions in an organization. Well, I'm not going to layer it on. It's not extra work. It's simply addressing the way in which you do your work, the way in which you deal with contractors, address challenges at the destination. It's not an extra layer. It's just a shift. And those KPIs are critical, of course. And your ability to manage and track them is critical.
Shannon, there's one of the things you said in your introduction that I just wanted to clarify with you. One of the things, don't look so worried, one of the things which I think characterizes efforts towards what they think is responsible tourism to the south of Canada is an assumption that we're still with CSR1. In other words, it's all about philanthropy. What you seem to be, although you said TreadRight is the philanthropic arm of the travel company, it does seem to me that you are talking about something different from philanthropy, which is changing the way the business does the business, which I would say brings you much closer to what's happening in Europe and the UK.
So I think that what's interesting is in this market, and by this I mean, the US and Canada, because of course there are a number, and I think a lot of people don't realize the number of leading tour operators that are based in Canada, Toronto specifically. There's quite a lot of us. There's always been an economic benefit to operating in Canada and selling to Americans. That's pretty clear. Currencies being what they are. And it's interesting that you say that in and around sort of 2008, post-crash, or even pre-crash, there was a lot of it was a trend, I think, in the industry to either start your own foundation or begin to, funnel money into projects. And that's sort of what was happening. There was a bit of an awakening to, we are successful businesses. We need to contribute. And yeah, CSR, one was to do so through philanthropic giving, and I think that's great. But what people must always understand, and what we often don't, which is why we get into conversations of regenerative versus sustainable, all of these efforts evolve, and they have to evolve, or else we're in a world of hurt. We're never gonna see any successes. So yeah, the Treadway Foundation started in 2008, when there was a number of these things, moving around the industry. But what we did was we identified at TreadRight that is two sides of the same coin with respect to sustainability. So you've got philanthropic giving. It's an expression of sustainability, but it's only half. And if you're only doing that in 2021, I think that's something to really, really consider. If you're doing enough. And then the way in which you operate is the other side of that coin. And I think that they have to support one another.
One of the things that interests me in the difference is, I've seen this most often, I guess, in South Africa, that, you can either give money to local artists and local communities, or you can organize it that tourists go and visit them and buy their stuff. And in a way, the second strategy is more empowering for the community, because they're becoming engaged with the economy, that they're having the opportunity to interface with the potential consumer. You see it a lot in Cape Town, where the young wire sculptors come out around the restaurants, and they're talking with the people at the dining tables. They're not really trying to sell things. They're really saying, do you like this? How would you like it to be different? They're doing the most sophisticated market research around developing their product in a way that's going to mean it sells better. And you just see that kind of entrepreneurialism then coming through from local communities. You can really only do that by engaging them in doing the business in some way. Do you recognize that, or am I talking?
No, I 100% recognize it. Where I struggle sometimes, I frequently struggle with this, is then you have the risk of feeling like a voyeur. And there are many travel companies that don't identify that risk and send you into something where you just feel like you're watching somebody else's life. So it does need to be implemented with participation. Yes.
And what, those fundamental ideas within responsible tourism about always traveling with respect and trying to develop a cultural understanding. There are some really good examples in Kerala, which perhaps on another occasion you and I might look at together, because I think they've gone a very long way to solving that problem. Because one of the things, when the tourists meet somebody who they're being expected to purchase from, there's always the embarrassment of not purchasing. If, on the other hand, it's organized in a way that you're actually paying to have that experience of the one I always remember, because I actually did it, of making the coir rope from the hairs on coconuts. I've still got the rope, it's in my bedroom. But because I knew I'd paid for that experience, I didn't feel the need to buy it. So it takes away that consumer transaction, because it's built in, you've got a paid visit to that place. And unfortunately, there's not enough of that, I think, in tourism. It puts you on a much better basis of the relationship between the two people. The economic transfer has taken place, but it's not dependent upon them selling me something I've already purchased, because I've bought an entrance fee, if you like, into their place.
Yeah, and I think too that, forgive the disruption, I think too that it takes training, it takes consideration, and it takes thoughtfulness. And that's why I love working with our, we call those who plan our trips. We've got so many brands within the groups. Everybody's called, experience design, product operations. I'll refer to all of those people that decide what the experience is going to be, secure it from a contracting perspective, and then implement it on the ground and deal with our guides, TDs and TMs. I refer to them all as product and ops, and it's why I love working with them so much, because there's that shared sort of, there's always a bit of a gut check when you're working with those guys. Hey, do you feel good about this right now? And some of my colleagues will look at me and say, no, this doesn't feel natural. This feels like we're just taking advantage of this community. So how do we fix this? And you know, that's why I'll say until I'm blue in the face that business function in travel and tourism is critical. And that's why I get a little frustrated when I see sustainability in your marketing team.
Doesn't work, does it?
Doesn't work at all.
It doesn't work either. I mean, that's the extraordinary thing. That kind of greenwashing, in the end, you get caught out.
Yeah, you do. You do.
Because
but it's
presumably what your companies need are repeat visitors and referrals. And we know from research done in the UK, and I don't think there's any reason to think it would be any different anywhere else, people don't refer things which they think might be irresponsible, because they don't want the associated guilt. They don't want it reflected on them. They may have enjoyed being irresponsible, but they don't, you know, most people don't have the kind of friends that you would share that irresponsibility with.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I often wonder what people think of those companies that encourage them to swim with a dolphin or ride on an elephant. I mean, those were two really easy campaigns in the UK, because when people realized what they were, they just stopped doing it. And the problem is, of course, that they remember that particular companies sold them those things, encouraged them to do it. And that memory will stay there, because, I mean, I've ridden on elephant back. I remember when it was. I remember who encouraged me to do it, and I don't feel good about it, you know. And okay, I didn't know. Perhaps they didn't know either, but perhaps they should have known, given that they were selling it.
Well, it's interesting in that that's the difference between the markets. It's not the only difference between the markets, but you know, I still think in some parts of North America, we still have a bit of an educational component that needs to go in place. Certainly, look, if I put something out into the marketplace, I'm always concerned about what the UK market is going to do to it. I think that they're always the most critical. The Australians can be critical as well. And I'm making gross generalizations here. So
it's okay. I like this particular generalization.
It's true, though. It's very true. We'll have a conversation at my team and we'll go through, okay, so how's this gonna land? What are they gonna think? Who's gonna, or even when we're building our training materials from our teams on climate action plan, a topic I know you love. You know, we think about the questions that each market's going to ask differently.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I quite like the fact that we live in a diverse world. I wouldn't want it to be any other way. And clearly, different source markets are going through these routes at the same pace. I mean, one of the things that might, I don't know if it would interest you or not, but I was fishing in mid Wales last year, the year before last, before COVID, and it's an area that gets almost no tourism. And as we were leaving, we couldn't actually get out down the lane because there was a hire car parked up with all four doors open right in the middle of the road, and we couldn't get past. And when I looked up to see what they were doing, it's a group of Chinese tourists who obviously for the first time seen a sheep, parked up, dived out the car. There they are photographing sheep. And you think there's two things extraordinary about that. One, people's everyday lives are exciting for other people because they'd obviously never seen sheep before. But also those Chinese tourists who, they started traveling, 15 years ago? And already they're in self-drive cars in remote parts of Wales where very few British people have been. And you begin to realize that there are new source markets coming on who are moving much more quickly to what we see as the new model of tourism. They've moved really fast through the groups and the resorts and all the rest of it. And they're into that independent travel much faster than certainly the British tourists managed it. And the Russians are going in the same way. The Israelis have always been ahead in that. It's an extraordinarily speeding up of that maturation of the source markets, I think. Yeah,
it's true. It's interesting because I don't think everyone recognized the speed through which some new markets are going through that maturation process. I think that the markets that consider themselves the mature, the traveler versus the tourist, certainly don't recognize that.
No, So how's it been for you going into a big organization like that? To some extent, okay, you'd had a bit of a track record with them, but to some extent you came into a very senior position, presumably with a mandate to create change from the very top. Otherwise, they were making a big mistake appointing somebody like you. You were clearly going to make change. So presumably you had their support, but did you face a lot of resistance, or did you find the door was half open?
So, I mean, it's a very unique vantage point that I had to take a job with an organization that I'd been a consultant with for, I don't know how many years, 10 years. I will say it was fascinating to see the barrier that an organization might have between organization and consultant go away. And the sort of welcoming that I will have received as a, you know, you're here, you're with us now, you're full time. That was unanticipated and a really, really happy coincidence. Not to say there were that many barriers to begin with, you know, it's just the welcoming was there. Brett Tolman, the chief executive whom I report to, he's all in. So I you know, and something we've spoken about before, I haven't explained the business case for sustainability for somebody at the Travel Corporation inside of 3 years. So there's a real understanding of what it means, the value of it. You know, are there sometimes questions about the way in which we should do something or the value of it? Sure. But I genuinely receive it in the form of a healthy debate, or, hey, Shannon, have you thought about this? This would be better. And nobody has come to me with something they've pitched as being better that hasn't been better yet. So that's why we're able to be, you know, successful, I think. It was a huge shift from coming to a small organization that you started and feeling like you know, were really successful and you'd owned it, to moving into such a massive organization. However, and interestingly, you know, I'll say that I came from the school of sustainability can only be niche because that's what the market was perpetuating when I was growing up in the market. And now I look at that as a completely irresponsible statement, because the opportunity of impact at the Travel Corporation through all of the brands, you just take one brand, you take Trafalgar, or you take Insight Vacations, you take the plans that they have taken the strategy that we've delivered a year ago, how we TreadRight, and they have built their own internal teams. Kentucky has done the same. All of our brands are doing this. We've built them their own action plan that addresses specifically what they need to do and who the ownership is amongst each of their brands. They are building out their marketing plans. They're building out all of their Make Travel Matter. They're all in. Now, the only challenge I have is trying to manage it all and make sure that we don't get to a place where they're doing things that we don't know about, so that we can track them, which is a really nice problem to have, frankly. So it's been a really positive experience going from small to big.
Let me just check what you just said. You basically said that your problem now isn't creating motivation, it's managing that motivation so that you can be sure that it's being tracked and reported accurately. Is that what you just said?
That's true. Yeah, it's true. It's a really
nice problem. Must be one of the most extraordinary things that's been said to me in the last 5 years.
I don't know how I got so lucky, but I do feel very like I every now and then my husband's pretty good at giving me a shake and saying, you know, you went to school for this, and you've been given this pretty unique opportunity. And yeah, I mean, the executive committee at the Travel Corporation has just been really supportive and engaged. You know, we have regular calls, and I'll update them when, you know, as and when it's needed, and it's a really positive experience.
So why are you describing this as luck? You said it was lucky.
I don't know. Fatal female flaw to call it luck.
Well, I hope it's not fatal. The female flaw, quite possibly, actually. I don't think men say that very often, although I would say it about my career. But so basically you found yourself working for an organization where at the very top, the CEO wanted this to happen.
Mhm.
This perhaps unfair to ask you this, but why do you think the CEO wants it to happen? Or should I ask him that?
I mean, you could ask him that. I've heard it asked of him before.
And what did he say?
I can summarize that, Brett believes in it in his own personal life, and his own family unit operates in his in as a responsible capacity as they can, if I can summarize it. When we talk, and I talk about the message of resiliency in sustainability, Brett agrees with that. There's always the business opportunity for cost savings, for new market share. Those have to be true for a business to understand and integrate sustainability. This can't be 100% altruism. And then there's, other looming issues that are coming down the track, regulatory components that are going to probably land on our desks soon, reporting requirements in certain markets. There are a lot of reasons. This is not just I feel good doing it. There's a strong business case for it. As I said, luckily I don't have to talk about it much. And then there's a personal desire, and it's a belief that this is right.
I guess the other advantage that someone like him has is that his business is not going to disappear tomorrow, and he knows that. And I do think that for some of the smaller operators, particularly in the context of COVID, are demonstrably not sure they'll be here in 2 weeks' time. For them, it's really hard to get their sites up, whereas somebody like Brett knows even if his business is going to suffer, and it must be in the current COVID situation, he knows he's still going to be around 5, 10, 15 years. And I do think that makes it easier to be able to focus on that and employ someone like you because of the economies of scale to help with that process.
100%. I mean, COVID's not been easy for anyone.
No.
However, the Travel Corporation is a healthy 100-year-old, well-managed business. So, and not everyone can say that. It's a unique opportunity. Yeah. So, when I say luck, I think, I work for an organization who believes in it. I don't have to bang on doors to speak to people. I work at an organization who ideas come to my team with an amazing team. And 100%, being a very well-run, healthy, robust organization.
I thought that my question the last time might have put you off using that word luck to describe your situation. I mean, surely the truth is that you were employed as a consultant, tried and tested before you were ever appointed. You must have been good at what you were doing to be appointed to what must be one of the plum jobs in travel and tourism.
I mean, I hope so. That's a tough one. I hope so, but I think I also have a really healthy dose of make sure you really can do it. So that's a motivating. That's a
kind of brings us back to resilience, doesn't it? Because that was a word you used a couple of minutes ago in this. I mean, where do you see travel and tourism in terms of resilience? And let me put that in the context for you. I'm slowly feeling braver about saying this, and I think it's something that we have to face up to as a sector. There's a number of different industries that come together in the sector, and that is that we cannot deny the role we've played in the spread of COVID. It's no good just having a hissy fit and saying, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but there are companies in the UK doing it, saying you must let us get back to normal business, we're hurting. The truth is we've been major vectors of COVID. We can't deny that. Moving people around the world spreads COVID. It requires human beings to travel, or some kinds of wildlife. So resilience it seems to me, is becoming a really fundamental question for the future, particularly if you assume, as I do, that there may well be further pandemics. Do you take a view on that?
I mean, when I speak about resilience and I look long term as many of us are able to, for me, resilience is a very big word. It's a package though. So, you know, from my perspective, in the simplest of terms, you have businesses that need to understand their impact on a place. A place is our product. And to date in our industry, there has been nobody checking on our product to make sure that the quality is true and it's maintained. And then you have the destinations who people still have to live there. A good place to visit is always going to be, or sorry, a good place to live is always going to be a good place to visit. And you know, continuing this level of everything's good and happy and sunny requires resiliency on an environmental scale. It requires us to address the issues that are around the corner, because as soon as we get out of this, you know, climate change is just going to be there saying, did you guys think I went away? You know, that's what I'm looking at when it comes to resiliency. When it comes to a further pandemic, I don't know that I even have the headspace to consider that when we're so thick into this one. And, you know, the mum in me hopes to hell it doesn't happen for several generations more. But that the powers that be are still preparing for it. So, you know, that felt like a lot of rambling to say that when I look at resiliency, I think we have more pressing issues than a second pandemic, because of the time scale of the issues we're facing right now. Because climate change is very real. It's very much in our generation, my children's generation.
And it's the twin crises, the twin environmental crises of biodiversity loss and climate change, which are obviously intimately related, and those two things drive on. My concern is that I think pandemic is probably more likely given those two things as well, and it becomes a really pressing issue to reorganize our relationship with nature and to allow some space. But it's also the rapidity of action, and you know, a lot of companies, I think, went into the crisis with almost no financial reserves. I mean, they're in a dodgy place anyway, and there's been far too much price competition, and really quality competition is a better place to be, where people's margins continue to be viable. Not everything should be a matter of the price. And I noticed when we go through your brands, none of those are cut price brands, are they?
No, but also, you know, I think that, as I said earlier, it's run with a conservative approach, and there's an understanding that a war chest is necessary. And the reality is, in our business, even the small guys, we're still what, like 70, 75, 80% small, medium-sized enterprises. And with respect, those are not the guys and girls that have, you know, 3-6 months in reserve. In some of those, if they have 3, they feel really like they're in a good spot. And that, as a small business owner, to me is frightful.
It is very difficult. One of the reasons that when Justin and I started the awards, we were determined that we would organize the awards in a way that big people could win. Because actually, if you're going to change the industry, you can change it to some extent through the small guys, but in the end, you've got to operate with the big players as well, because they have much more influence over the way the market works. So I hope very much that we'll be able to work more on the responsible tourism agenda with TreadRight and with you and with those brands as they become ready. I'm sure, Shannon, if we could come perhaps to the more difficult part of this conversation, but we don't want to shirk it. It's 40 brands. Operating in, I would guess, 80 countries around the world, probably, perhaps even more, in terms of source markets and destinations. So that's a massive, massive task to look at sustainability across such a range of markets and destinations. And I'm sure that somebody somewhere is going to see this interview and go and have a look for some piece of bad practice somewhere in what you're doing. Does that worry you?
I mean, I'm Canadian. I don't like to be criticized. So yeah, sure. It worries me to a point. Do I lose sleep over it? Not at all, because there's no way that you're ever going to hear myself or anyone from the Travel Corporation or any of our brands stand up and say, we figured it out. Look, we built this strategy. We put it in place. Now we can wash our hands of it. We're about to make some announcements with respect to our approach to climate and what we are going to do with it. And it has gone around all of the brands and many team members to try and get it to a point where we're very comfortable with it, but yet prepared that people are going to have questions. And, this is a journey. And I struggle to use that word because I think it's one of those, it's becoming like the word sustainability. It kind of makes people's eyes glaze over, but it's legitimately true. When you deal with such a large scale of operating in so many various people, invariably something needs to shift to become better, or because you made a mistake. And we acknowledge that. And that is just the way you run a business. You adapt and you shift and you improve, hopefully. We don't want to go backwards. And so, we've put out 11 goals under How We Tread Right. We're actively implementing those goals. And we have stumbling blocks all the time. Climate reductions on carbon. Well, we haven't operated this year, and we launched a new reporting structure just before we went into COVID. So, these are hiccups that we need to deal with. So people can go ahead and poke the holes. In fact, I welcome it if they're constructive. The thing that I struggle with when it comes to the whole issue of sustainable tourism and all of the various alternative terms that I could list here that all effectively mean the same thing, in my opinion. We're all so bloody opinionated, and it's not always constructive. We're going to disagree on approaches. What's important to me is that you are researching your approach, you're implementing it, you're measuring your progress so you can at least understand if it's the right or the wrong approach, and you're doing better. The worst thing we could do, and what a lot of industry is doing, I think, is just sort of stuck in inertia and doing nothing. I would rather see an imperfect sustainability approach or strategy that has action than just another sustainability policy that says we care.
It's quite interesting you say that, because I think we fundamentally agree, although we use different language to describe it. Because I would say the difference between responsible tourism and sustainable tourism is that you take responsibility by taking action to achieve sustainability. And you say very clearly what it is you feel you can take responsibility for. Because I would guess that a fundamental problem for you when you look at the holidays you sell, so I don't think you run an airline, do you?
No.
You're so big, you see, I can't be sure. But I don't think you do run an airline. And, a lot of your travelers, probably most of them, are going to arrive by air. And there's nothing much you can do about that. You don't manage that part of the process. And in the same way, if they travel to London and they drop litter in the park, there's not much you can do to control that either. I mean, to something you can only control what you can take responsibility for, and that's why I like that word. And it seems to me that the other benefit is you can say, well, we're working on these things. These are things we can do something about. The other things other people have to do something about, we cannot do everything. And it seems to me that's a legitimate and sensible thing to say, rather than make very broad declarations about how wonderful this kind of tourism is. We never intended responsible tourism to be a consumer-facing brand expression. It isn't. It's much more about what people do.
You have to know your scope, and
Yes.
and you have to, and that's not just the consultant in me talking. And you need to make sure you don't experience scope creep, and you need to just paint your boundaries around what it is you operate. We have a footprint. We own coaches. We own ships, we own hotels, and look, working with the Red Carnation hotels in Uniworld, it's in some way it's a longer lead. It's a little bit slower because of the technology that's required in some cases to make change, but it's a closed loop unit. It's so much easier to define than the coach brands because their supply chain is so disparate. But you draw your lines and your boundaries and you work within them. And I think that that's important. And I think that that's tricky because not everyone appreciates that. And often the critics don't appreciate scope.
No, they don't. And one of the things that worries me about the carbon agenda is people talk about the different areas where you might reduce your carbon emissions. There's always something less convincing about a tour operator who pushes all the responsibility for reducing the emissions down the supply chain and doesn't sort out their own offices, which is something you see frequently enough to make me really quite cross about it, because it's very easy to push responsibility away when you haven't even sorted out the problems which are under your control.
That's actually a lesson I learned from Brett early on that I didn't understand, and I thought he was wrong. He wasn't wrong. And it was very much get your own house in order first. And it was very much I really don't even want to stand on a soapbox until our own house is in order. And I was worried I was worried at the time that it meant that it was going to take too long later on for people to start to associate the work that the brands are doing with impact, positive impact. He was right. And
let's check what you just said again, Shannon. You're kind of causing me to doubt my hearing today several times. But you've just told me that the CEO insisted that you sort out at much greater expense how you run your operation before you started telling other people how to run theirs.
Oh yeah, offices were first. Solar in offices, geothermal in offices, measurements on offices. And we own several of our offices, of course, not all. No, it's very much get your own house in order, before you start telling the world about it. And again, I thought, and there was a conversation about the differences between North Americans, perhaps Americans wishing to tell their story too soon. I'll never forget it. And I did. I really worried that we were going to lose the opportunity to get to market on some of our impact, but I was wrong.
Shannon, as this comes to an end, I think I should say how disappointed I am in myself that I've only recently discovered what you're doing. I regret that, and I hope that we'll be able to do some more things together in the future. Is there anything else you want to add before we draw this to a close?
No, thank you so much for saying so. And it's lovely to chat about it, frankly, because you do lose sight of I suppose the scope and the breadth sometimes when you're so engaged with the teams. And it's always the teams that make it successful. And in this case, that's very much the case.
I get the really strong impression that this whole sustainability, responsibility, whatever we want to call it, doesn't matter what the name is. As you've said several times, it's the actions that matter and the transparency about the reporting. I think that's there is a really strong agreement between you and I.
Yep. Yeah, it's all too easy to just throw a hashtag on it.
Yes, and we see a lot of that still in travel and tourism, and it's not called out. As long as you're using the latest hip word, too many people think it's okay. I like the idea of action, and I particularly like your notion of knowing your scope, because I think that's always been fundamental. It's a way we've not articulated it in the past, but that's been a really useful concept today, and I should be taking that away. Shannon, thank you very much. It's been really great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed.